Salam sejahtera, anda sedang menyaksikan Niaga AWANI bersama saya Nina Rozman. Seperti biasa jam ini kami akan membawakan pelbagai rangkuman berita niaga ekonomi dari peringkat tempatan hinggalah ke peringkat antarabangsa. Dan sempena pilihan raya negeri yang ke-17 Sabah, kita akan membawakan pelbagai perbincangan daripada pelbagai dimensi untuk melihat bagaimanakah hala tuju Sabah selepas ini. Dan saya akan beri fokus kepada pelancongan di Sabah. Namun sebelum itu kita akan kongsikan kepada anda bagaimanakah prestasi ataupun kita lihat daripada Dapatan Kajian daripada Tourism Malaysia yang telah mengeluarkan iaitu antara prestasi kajian bagaimanakah penginapan berbayar setakat Januari sehingga Jun 2025 separuh pertama tahun ini. Dan kalau kita nak melihat daripada segi ini terbahagi kepada dua bahagian iaitu hotel dan juga bilik. Dan dari pada tahun 2024, jumlah bilik kita mendapati sebanyak 5,248. Namun pada tahun 2025 sehingga Jun setakat ini kita dapat lihat jumlah bilik itu telah meningkat kepada 5,319. Kita dapat menyaksikan peningkatan sebanyak 1.4%. Bukan sahaja kadar bilik meningkat tetapi bilik kita lihat jumlah ataupun kapasiti juga meningkat hampir mencecah 2% daripada 2024 berjumlah 341,000 kepada 347,000 pada tahun 2025 setakat Jun ini. Dan ini adalah sekaligus ingin kita melihat bagaimanakah gambaran ataupun jumlah hotel dan jumlah bilik yang semakin meningkat menunjukkan prestasi pelancongan di Malaysia setakat Jun 2025 mengalami peningkatan atau momentum pemulihan berterusan sejak pandemik COVID-19. Seterusnya untuk kita lihat bagaimanakah kadar penghuni bilik di Malaysia untuk kita lihat perbandingan daripada 2024 tahun lepas sehinggalah pada Jun 2025. Kalau kita lihat tahun lepas mencatatkan 52.6% tetapi sehingga Jun tahun ini kita dapat saksikan peningkatan daripada segi jumlah penghuni sebanyak 54.1%. Dan kita lihat jumlah penghuni kebanyakannya yang melebihi kadar nasional kita dapat saksikan di sini. Antaranya adalah Sabah pada tahun setakat Jun 2025 telah merekodkan sebanyak jumlah penghuni bilik sebanyak 52.0% melebihi kadar nasional. Dan kita lihat bukan itu saja, di Pahang juga di sini kalau boleh saya saksikan di Pahang pada tahun 2024 74% dan pada tahun ini setakat Jun adalah 75.2%. Dan kita lihat Pahang antara penghuni yang paling tinggi di sini, mereka antara clear winner kerana kita lihat Pahang mempunyai Genting Highland dan juga Cameron Highland. Di sini Pahang jadi puncak pada waktu musim pelancongan dan pada cuti sekolah. Dan kita lihat Kuala Lumpur Putrajaya juga mempunyai kadar penghuni yang tinggi melebihi kadar nasional sebanyak Putrajaya 56.0% dan Kuala Lumpur menunjukkan 63.6% setakat Jun 2025. Dan ini menunjukkan prestasi ataupun momentum pemulihan pelancongan di Malaysia di bandar terutamanya Kuala Lumpur dan Putrajaya semakin meningkat dan semakin momentum yang agak positif. Namun kalau kita lihat kadar penghuni di beberapa negeri yang agak rendah seperti di sini adalah dari Terengganu sebanyak 41.5%, Kelantan 41.8%, termasuk juga dengan negeri di Melaka iaitu 42.8% yang telah direkodkan walaupun ia rendah sedikit, rendah berbanding negeri-negeri yang mencatat prestasi tinggi lebih daripada kadar nasional, tapi kita lihat ia melebihi kadar 40%. Dan kita lihat antara top 5 mempunyai kadar penghuni bilik yang tinggi di Malaysia daripada Januari sehinggalah Jun selama 6 bulan. Ini adalah antara lokal-lokal tempat yang paling banyak ramai orang datang pelancong tiba. Genting Highland merekodkan 96.8%. Antara tempat-tempat lokasi yang ramai penghuni bilik, penghuni hotel dan juga ramai pelancong yang datang ke sini untuk bercuti dan berhuni. Dan kita lihat Batu Ferringhi merekodkan 73.5%, Petaling Jaya PJ 62% dan Johor Bahru hampir mencecah 60% dan Kota Kinabalu KK Sabah juga mencatatkan antara top 5 jumlah penghuni yang tinggi di Malaysia sebanyak 56.0% yang dapat kita saksikan setakat Jun 2025. Dan kalau kita lihat bagaimanakah iaitu penghuni ataupun tetamu hotel ini. Tetamu hotel pada suku pertama untuk kita saksikan iaitu daripada segi penduduk domestik, penghuni domestik hotel ia mencatatkan 15.13 juta. Dan kalau kita lihat peringkat antarabangsa juga tinggi merekodkan 8.15 juta. Dan kalau kita lihat jumlah di sini, keseluruhan jumlah pada suku pertama, jumlah tetamu hotel merekodkan 23.28 juta, dengan antara pemacu utama adalah penghuni hotel peringkat domestik. Namun kalau kita nak saksikan di sini, ini adalah pada tahun 2024, dan kalau kita nak lihat di sini adalah pada tahun 2025, jumlah penghuni hotel kebanyakan daripada domestik adalah 15.17 juta. Belah kiri adalah 2024 dan belah kanan ni adalah prestasi penghuni hotel pada tahun 2025. Di atas adalah penghuni hotel domestik dan di bawah adalah penghuni hotel antarabangsa, dan jelas menunjukkan kebanyakan penghuni hotel adalah daripada domestik punya tetamu. Dan kalau kita lihat di sini pada suku kedua juga mencatatkan peningkatan. Untuk kita lihat perbandingan suku tahun ke tahun, pada tahun suku kedua 2024 merekodkan 15 juta penghuni domestik, dan 16.15 telah direkodkan pada suku kedua pada tahun 2025. Kita dapat saksikan peningkatan daripada jumlah penghuni hotel, iaitu 2024 campur lokal, domestik dan juga antarabangsa 23.55 juta, dan pada tahun suku kedua 2025 kita lihat penduduk domestik dan jumlah penghuni hotel antarabangsa meningkat kepada 25.13 juta. Dan ini adalah prestasi penghuni hotel untuk melihat prestasi daripada suku ke suku, dan ini adalah data seri masa untuk kita saksikan jumlah penghuni hotel daripada mengikuti setiap negeri daripada Januari dan sehingga Jun pada tahun 2025. Dan kalau boleh anda saksikan di sini daripada kiri, kita dapat saksikan bagaimanakah penduduk di negeri Perlis. Domestik mencatatkan 161,000, antarabangsa 4,747, dan kita lihat daripada Perlis, Labuan sehinggalah penghuni hotel di Kuala Lumpur mencatatkan antara yang paling tinggi. Kalau kita lihat Kuala Lumpur adalah bandar, sudah tentu lebih banyak penghuni hotel di situ, dan ini adalah bagaimana untuk kita menyaksikan jelas peningkatan yang berterusan dari segi banyak tetamu yang duduk di hotel daripada Januari sehinggalah Jun 2025. Dan ini adalah antara top 5 states, iaitu antara penduduk yang mempunyai penghuni hotel yang paling tinggi, iaitu daripada Kuala Lumpur, Pahang, Johor, Selangor dan juga Pulau Pinang. Sudah tentu ini adalah top negeri yang mempunyai penghuni paling banyak pada waktu musim pelancongan, musim cuti sekolah. Dan kalau kita lihat jumlah keseluruhan pada tahun 2025, penghuni hotel telah mencatatkan sebanyak lebih kurang 48 juta berbanding 2024, iaitu 46 juta, peningkatan sebanyak 4.0%, dan domestik meningkat hampir mencecah 3.9%. Tapi pada tahun kalau kita dapat peningkatan lebih ketara adalah daripada tetamu hotel antarabangsa, telah meningkat daripada tahun 2024 sehingga Jun 2025 kepada 4.1%. Dan ini untuk kita saksikan bagaimanakah OPR ataupun kadar penghuni mengikut iaitu kadar bayaran hotel di sini. Kalau anda dapat saksikan pada tahun 2024 kebanyakan kadar purata hotel berada setiap bilik lebih kadar nasional RM246, tapi pada tahun 2025 telah menurun sedikit kepada RM236. Dan kalau kita nak lihat Sabah, sempena pilihan raya negeri Sabah, kita nak lihat daripada aspek pelancongan lebih detail, iaitu daripada segi penghuni ataupun kadar penghuni bilik di Sabah, iaitu sebanyak satu bilik lebih kurang RM362. Sedikit peningkatan kalau kita nak bandingkan dengan tahun sebelumnya pada tahun 2024 pada tahun RM248. Tapi ini adalah untuk kita dapat saksikan bagaimanakah jumlah di peringkat Sabah antara negeri-negeri mempunyai berapa jumlah penghuni hotel, dan sedikit untuk kita saksikan bagaimanakah pelancongan di Sabah. Namun bukan itu saja, dan kalau kita lihat ada beberapa data, sedikit sahaja data untuk saya kongsikan, dan ini lebih khusus kepada iaitu tetamu ataupun pelancong yang tiba di Sabah setakat 9 bulan pertama tahun 2025. Dan kalau kita lihat pada Januari sehingga September, jumlah pelancong yang telah tiba di Sabah adalah pada 2.8 juta, peningkatan daripada tahun lepas kepada tahun ini setakat September kepada 17.0%, dan kita lihat ketibaan pelancong domestik 1.6%, peningkatan 16%, dan iaitu ketibaan pelancong antarabangsa juga meningkat kepada 1.1 juta kepada 17%, dan kita lihat keseluruhan jumlah yang pelancong yang telah berbelanja setakat September 2025 adalah kepada 6.58 juta, peningkatan 17% berbanding tahun sebelumnya, itu pada tahun 2024. Tapi untuk kita menyaksikan bagaimanakah kedudukan sebelum pandemik 2019, kita dapat saksikan ketibaan pelancong ketibaan pelancong di Sabah 4.2%. Namun selepas kita mengalami pandemik, keseluruhan ekonomi tutup, iaitu kita krisis kesihatan, krisis ekonomi, kita dapat lihat kebanyakannya banyak jatuh, keseluruhan hampir semua industri yang jatuh, dan kita lihat pelancongan antara yang mengalami penurunan yang agak teruk berbanding sektor-sektor lain kalau kita lihat. Namun masuk fasa pemulihan 2021-2022, jumlah kedatangan ataupun ketibaan pelancong di Sabah dan negeri-negeri lain semakin meningkat, dan kita lihat antara angka terkini pada tahun 2024, jumlah pelancong telah mencatat ketibaan sebanyak 3.1 juta, iaitu 20.4%. Dan kalau kita lihat di sini, walaupun kita telah mengalami proses pemulihan, tetapi jumlah ini menunjukkan bahawa pelancongan di Sabah sudah mengalami ataupun menghadapi momentum pertumbuhan yang positif pasca pemulihan pandemik COVID-19. Tetapi angkanya masih rendah berbanding pra-pandemik, dan sudah tentu bergerak ke hadapan untuk kita saksikan bagaimana kita lihat usaha kerajaan untuk memastikan apakah antara strategi untuk rancakkan lagi pelancongan ekonomi tempatan Sabah ini agar kita dapat mencapai kepada paras jumlah ketibaan pelancong sama seperti pra-pandemik, iaitu lebih daripada 4 juta pelancong. Namun ini adalah antara data semasa dan data terkini dapat kita saksikan sehingga September 2025. Tetapi saya akan mempersilakan tetamu yang sudah bersedia dalam talian, iaitu Dato' Azli. Kalau kita lihat daripada tetamu daripada Profesor Ajung UMK dan Timbalan Presiden BIDA, saya nak ucapkan terima kasih Dato' Azli kerana sudi meluangkan masa bersama kami. Banyak data yang telah saya kongsikan sebentar tadi. Kalau kita lihat, ada lagi beberapa data yang tidak dapat saya kongsikan, seperti berapakah jumlah flight di Sabah. Kalau kita lihat di peringkat antarabangsa, berapakah kapasiti ataupun pergerakan laluan penerbangan setiap minggu untuk pergi di Sabah International, ada 117, domestik kekal antara paling tinggi 447. Kita lihat jumlah seat pun telah meningkat daripada 21,000 untuk antarabangsa, domestik pun 77,000. Tetapi secara keseluruhan kita dapat saksikan peningkatan pelancongan di Sabah ini. Namun bantu kami faham bagaimana untuk kita memahami, tapi angka yang kita telah capai sehingga kini masih belum sama seperti pra-pandemik COVID-19, iaitu jumlah penduduk pelancong hampir mencecah lebih pada 4 juta. Tapi kini kita sudah meningkat tapi masih 3 juta. Tapi bantu kami faham bagaimanakah lanskap pelancongan di Sabah ketika ini.
Baik, bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh, dan terima kasih Nina dengan satu orang kata analisis yang cukup tinggi kalau kita kirakan hari ini. Memang kita tengok trend pasaran pelancong di Sabah tak sama ataupun tak dapat nak mengatasi pra-pandemik sebelum ni. Yang mana saya mungkin dia dirangsang oleh pembukaan banyak destinasi pelancongan baru di seluruh dunia, khususnya di rantau Asia Tenggara. Kita tengok banyak destinasi lain yang mungkin turut sama-sama mempromosikan produk-produk masing-masing, dan saya percaya kalau ikut daripada UNWTO punya prediction, jangkaan mereka bahawa proses pemulihan ekonomi ataupun ketibaan pelancong akan pulih sepenuhnya pada tahun 2024, dan diharapkan, sebenarnya kita harapkan Sabah dapat mengatasi rekod pada tahun 2000 sebelum pandemik, iaitu sebanyak 4 juta, tapi masih lagi belum mencapai satu tahap yang membanggakan. Tapi saya kira ini sebenarnya ada dalam perancangan ataupun proses yang mungkin dirangka oleh pihak tourism Sabah itu sendiri.
Baik, sudah tentu bergerak ke hadapan. Apa yang boleh kita dilakukan? Kita tahu industri sektor pelancongan Sabah ni adalah merupakan antara tunjang pemacu ekonomi Sabah. Jadi apakah antara strategi? Kerana kita tahu Sabah ni kaya, dikenali dengan eco pelancongan. Namun kita nak memastikan sektor pelancongan ni inklusif, bukan dapat tekanan ataupun banyak crowded dekat di Kota Kinabalu, Sandakan, Sepona itu, tapi kita nak memastikan pelancongan itu sampai ke luar daerah, inklusif. Bagaimana, Datuk?
Ya, sebenarnya Sabah ni memang kaya dengan produk-produk pelancongan ya. Yang mana untuk maklumat sebagaimana yang terkandung dalam dokumen seperti rangka tindakan pelancongan Sabah, Tourism Blueprint dan juga plan pembangunan Sabah Maju Jaya. visi jangka masa panjang Sabah sebenarnya menjelang tahun 2023 dan 2030 adalah untuk menjadikan negeri ini sebagai destinasi eko pelancongan dan juga pelancongan berasaskan komuniti yang mampan dan bersaing di peringkat global, di mana alam semula jadi, budaya dan komuniti tempatan ini dapat wujud secara harmoni. Justru itu kita percaya bahawa satu penyelarasan dengan ekonomi tempatan sangat penting, khususnya dalam kita nak mengagihkan faedah ekonomi ni. Dan saya percaya Sabah mempunyai strategi pelancongan dengan memberi tumpuan kepada pelancongan berasaskan community based tourism, CBT, dan juga pembangunan luar bandar. Yang ini untuk menggalakkan tumpuan berlebihan di lokasi pelancongan utama dan juga limpahan ekonomi dapat kita spread ataupun panjang ke kampung-kampung. Dan ia juga dapat membuka sebenarnya satu peluang pekerjaan baru kerana industri pelancongan ni kita fahamlah merupakan satu pembangkit ekonomi utama di negeri Sabah yang dapat mewujudkan banyak peluang pekerjaan dari berbagai sektor seperti hotel, pengangkutan, pemandu pelancong dan juga perusahaan budaya tempatan. Dan selain daripada itu fungsi komuniti setempat juga dapat diperkasakan melalui inisiatif CBT ataupun inat desa. Komuniti tempatan diperkasakan melalui pembangunan produk-produk pelancongan mereka sendiri. Dan ini membolehkan pelancong merasai gaya hidup masyarakat kampung sambil menjana pendapatan yang mampan. Jadi menyentuh tentang penyelarasan dengan kelestarian alam sekitar tadi tu, eko pelancongan sebenarnya menjadi satu teras utama di Sabah. Dan Sabah, ya.
Datuk, sebelum kita mengakhiri perbincangan, banyak telah dikongsikan oleh Datuk tapi kita tidak mempunyai banyak masa melihat kepada kalau kita lihat makin banyak bilik, harga pun kalau kita lihat semakin meningkat. Ini menunjukkan keyakinan pelabur terhadap industri pelancongan di Sabah dan di seluruh negeri Malaysia. Tetapi kalau kita nak lihat bergerak ke hadapan, apakah antara 5 keutamaan pelancong yang perlu disegerakan diberi keutamaan terutama dalam tempoh 12 bulan yang akan datang dalam konteks tourism Malaysia, dan terutama apakah antara menjadi fokus utama selepas pilihan raya negeri kita mendapat calon-calon yang akan mentadbir negeri ini dan akan beri fokus kepada pembangunan pelancongan. Apa yang harus kita beri fokus utama?
Ya, memang berdasarkan hala tuju strategik dan inisiatif tadi, kita nak pergi kepada 5 keutamaan yang kita laksanakan, Sabah laksanakan dalam tempoh yang akan datang, serta cara kejayaan untuk kita nak ukur secara konkret. Dan yang pertamanya kita nak memulihkan dan meningkatkan kesesambangan undang-undang. Accessibility itu penting. Dan ini saya percaya pihak kerajaan negeri juga sedang berusaha untuk ke arah itu. Dan juga kita harap dengan pilihan raya yang akan datang ni kita dapat mewujudkan satu ekosistem politik yang lebih stabil. Bila ekonomi kestabilan politik ni kita dapat melihat satu kepimpinan yang jelas daripada segi dasarnya, daripada hala tuju pelancongan kerajaan negeri, kita sebenarnya berharap agar industri pelancongan ni dapat kita lestarikan, kita dapat semarakkan sebagaimana sebelum pandemik tadi. Jadi saya harap dengan pemilihan jentera ataupun pemilihan yang Nina.
Okey, baik. Terima kasih Dato' Azli kerana bantu kami faham bagaimanakah lanskap pelancongan di Sabah ketika ini dan apakah antara strategi untuk kita mengangkat lagi industri ini dan dapat memastikan pemahaman rakyat itu sendiri apakah antara sumbangan ataupun manfaat yang langsung kita dapat daripada pembangunan sektor pelancongan ini. Sekali lagi saya nak ucapkan terima kasih dan setiap perkongsian ini akan kami rangkumkan dalam astroni.com dan di semua platform digital Astro AWANI. Baik, kita akan bersama dengan rakan Sugas Ibrahim Sani akan mengambil alih dan Niaga AWANI akan berhenti rehat seketika dan kembali selepas ini.
Di dalam setiap berita yang dibawa, konteks amat penting. Cara kita mendapat berita kian berubah. Melalui media sosial maupun saluran digital yang lain serta kaca TV. Kami sentiasa membawakan yang tergempar dan terkini.
Kita buat sesuatu yang berbeza.
Berteraskan acuan verifikasi yang diamalkan supaya setiap fakta adalah sahih. Daripada analisis pelbagai sudut yang mendalam, laporan-laporan khas dan perbincangan yang membina negara. Inklusif, suara rakyat kami ajukan. Keseimbangan persepsi kami pastikan. Kerana setiap cerita mempunyai impak yang tersendiri dan perlu dibawa dengan penelitian yang terperinci. Pastikan Astro AWANI menjadi pilihan anda tidak kira di mana sahaja anda berada. Saluran berita paling dipercayai di Malaysia.
Thanks for joining us. This is The Economy. I'm your host, Ibrahim Sani. The Sabah Elections is just around the corner. In a few days' time, we're going to see the nomination day, and in 2 weeks' time, we're going to see the polling day start. And this is, of course, the first of a series of elections that is going to go through for Malaysia. The next one will be Melaka and Sarawak and Johor, and of course, the big one, the general elections that has to be done by February 2028. So all this is actually predicated on the Sabah elections first. So there's a lot of eyes on this state election, and of course we're trying to understand a little bit better in terms of how the political dynamics is shaping up, how policies are being debated and being targeted and being shared to the public, but more importantly the political dynamics that exist inside the Sabah landscape. So here joining us is my friend Arif Adi Putra, the research associate at IDS, or the Institute for Development Studies Sabah. Adi, thank you very much. We've always had this idea of getting you on the show for quite some time, and what a momentous time for us to have you right now, considering that there's a lot that is being discussed at the Sabah elections. But having said that, this is what we were expecting anyway. There's nothing new in terms of the kind of chatter and drama. I mean, Iwan just resigned a few days ago, and UPCO just took themselves out of PH. GRS has just made the announcement a few days ago. This followed very closely with BN and PH, and I think the first was BAP. And of course, you know, the big ones have been mentioned, but you know, we never know. Nomination day is nomination day. We might see some surprises. How has the political drama shaped up, and is it part of what IDS thinks of how this election is going to be taking shape?
I think it reflects a very broad sentiment when it comes to Sabah's election, which is that it's always been seen as dynamic. Things are always ever shifting, alliances always changes. At this point, it's the most dynamic it's ever been. You have almost as many parties as you have seats up for grabs, right?
Okay, wait. Normally when people say an election is coming up, they will always say that line. This is the craziest that has ever been. But is it truly?
Yeah, it's been on an upward trend, because now you have a lot of parties putting their hat within the election itself. You have more freedom for parties to actually enter politics, because some branch off from previous more established parties, more conventional parties, and they decide, hey, we have an issue here that the leadership doesn't listen to, I can form a party. So it's very easy to form one. It's easy to go as an independent candidate. So for some people, saying now than before, it's the most democratic election Sabah's ever seen, because you have so much choice. Some even just standing on one particular issue. You have parties that just stand on the Zara issue itself, and that's the entire campaign slogan.
Yeah.
So you have parties for all kinds of flavors, but of course you have the big ones that's going to be considered anything serious for this upcoming election.
Let's talk about the Sabah Black Wave, I suppose. Many viewers, especially in Semenanjung or Peninsula, might not be familiar altogether. You can share that with our audience?
I think it just comes from a general sentiment that established parties are not functioning according to some people that do support the Black Wave, and they thought that rather than actually having to go with a party or a coalition, and then there's a lot of internal negotiation going along, why not we just cast a stone and see where it lands? What's the result going to be? And I believe the Black Wave led by Dato' Verdon has already planned for 13 seats all along the West Coast, from his base of operations in Kudat, except for Api-Api. They are not so confident in urban seats, very urban seat there. But they're going to see just where it goes, where it lands. And he did say that independent Aduns have never been in the opposition. So see where it goes, who gives the best offer. That's also going to be a general trend as we look at this election itself, the negotiating and the horse trading that goes behind the scenes. So,
of course, IDS has been working quite closely with many of these individuals, such as the people that are currently putting their names in the hat. And of course, policy direction is one area of concern that I want to explore shortly in our discussion. But still on the political dynamics, right now there's no clear winner, so to speak. Even after so close to the polling date, does this worry the politicos out there right now? And are they trying to put their best feet forward, or more mudslinging is expected to be done?
I think a bit of both. Everyone is doing the rhetoric in public, but also in private, they are also having their own internal negotiations with one another. If I had to give an analogy, is like, let's say you have a WhatsApp group of 5 people, right? You don't like one person, you make a WhatsApp group of 4 people without the one guy you don't like. Then that guy makes a WhatsApp group with 4 people with one guy he doesn't like. So you have the entire combination of the 5 people and every permutation and configuration that you have. Everyone is talking to each other, minus someone they don't want to be listening, to be eavesdropping in. That is the current situation and dynamic we have right now. Everyone behind the scenes are talking to see what kind of potential pact can be made. Because at this point, it looks to be that no one is able to form a simple majority. So it's forced to make coalitions, forced to make alliances. Some that has broken off, maybe they'll reform back to make another coalition itself. And that is something that was going to be a defining characteristic of this election, if anything else.
But that would also mean they can't go full-throated assault on their political opponents, because you never know. In 2 weeks' time, while I go hardcore attacking that particular person or that particular party or that particular issue, in 2 weeks' time, I might have to lick my own wounds and come back and make an alliance with these kind of people that I just attacked. Does that bring about some form of decorum at least?
Not really, because it's normal for everyone to be mudslinging, then suddenly working back together. Back when the Warisan Plus coalition, which was Warisan, DAP, PKR, they were riding on the reform agenda, they were riding on the anti-corruption agenda. Next you know, DAP is suddenly working with GRS.
Yeah.
PH is working with GRS itself, right?
Yeah.
And then now you have these issues of scandals and all these alleged scandals and videos coming out. They're still keeping keeping hush about it, right? So loyalty depends on, really, doesn't matter what you say, that's all in the past, because everyone are to an extent friends with one another in Sabah. So comes a time there was always some channel to approach one another and say, hey, we worked together before, let's try we can work something out again.
Yeah. Let's also go to the most important stakeholder, the rakyat. We're looking at over 3 million voters for this particular election. What is the sentiment amongst the rakyat today?
I think general confusion for rakyat in Sabah, because with so many parties, we've never had this much choice or availability. So it throws a spanner into the works. Now people are thinking, okay, this party talks about this, Sabah for Sabahans or Sabah rights, but this party also talks about Sabah for Sabahans. Just a different flavor, maybe different ethnic focus, right? Maybe different religious focus, right? So that makes voters confused. They don't know who to really vote for, because it seems that everybody is saying the same thing. They are pushing for the same issues and they're pushing for the same agenda. It's just that maybe the ethnic composition of the parties are different. So that could have a bearing on decision, but most of the time we have a lot of people in Sabah, voters, especially more older voters who are a bit more experienced in this. They don't know who to vote for anymore. The conventional choices are almost long gone. It's not the same days of UMNO, which is very monolithic, which was quite the obvious choice for many people. Now you're split. You have so much choice that you don't really know where to go.
Does that apply to the first-time voters as well, where the general confusion is actually prevalent?
Yeah, definitely, especially with young voters, because for some, this is going to be their first ever election.
Yeah.
And they're overwhelmed with what each party brings to the table, because what we've gathered from a lot of the youth is that they all seem the same, but there's so many of them. So what happens when you do with a lot of the same, right? Do you just throw a rock and then see where it lands? Or are there more methodical considerations to be made? Definitely in the urban areas, it's a bit more obvious, which they're more aware of good governance, these ideas of good governance and reform, where they want to see Sabah governance taken to a much more mature level. They would look to a party that's able to showcase those kinds of qualities and elements and what they can promise. But if you look in the rural area, it's completely different. Not sure what to do, not sure what to make of these choices. At the end of the day, is what can these parties really offer that's tangible and on the ground, that directly resonates with them in a direct way.
And so because of this, do you believe that voter turnout is going to be an issue? We might not see a great number of voter turnout for this election.
I've heard with issues with voter turnout is going to...
Especially transport cost is overwhelming right now.
Yeah, definitely. I mean...
But that's always been the
always
case
been
for
the
Sabah,
case,
yeah. But more so now.
I mean, historically, voter turnout with Sabah has always been about 55% to 60% there, just about more than half. But this time around, we see a lot of talk saying that a lot of people not going out to vote this time. A lot of experienced people who have gone through many elections, they might not be going out to vote. Now, will this be offset by younger people who a lot of campaigns have been done for them to go out to vote? It's another story, because now youth makes up at least 55% of the Sabahan
What,
electorate.
really?
Yeah, so it's very youth-driven this time. Whether or not they will come out to vote is another story entirely, because historically they have never been very active in coming out to vote. I believe in the last election the turnout was about 17%, very, very low among youth. So there's a lack of engagement with youth, which a lot of...
Also, total youth, 100%, only 17 came out. This is the last election.
Yeah, sad to say. I mean, it's very disconcerting, because there hasn't been much attempt to engage with the youth when it comes to political messaging or even outreach.
Let's now move and pivot towards policy, which is your mainstay and your, I guess, bread and butter issue right now. I want to ask you about some of the policies that is currently being talked about. You touched very briefly just now about Sabahans. That's one. Another issue is on revenue and royalties, where the Kota Kinabalu High Court has just made a verdict that the federal government must give 40% of revenue, of which they have not yet honoured. Another angle is on race relations. And for many of the Malaysians right now, especially those in Semenanjung, they might not be even aware of the racial dynamics and the religious overtones that is befalling such a beautiful state like Sabah, from the KDMR to the Malay, what do you call this, coastal areas and so on. And then, of course, the fourth area is on some key issues on infrastructure, as well as debt and how to grow investments and tourism. So as you can see, there's a lot of issues that is currently needs to be talked about. Let's start with the big one, which is federalism, Sabah for Sabahans. Where does the issue lie today, and how are the political parties approaching this issue per se?
I believe the whole Sabah for Sabah scenario, which I believe Parti Star with Dr. Jeffrey Kittingan, who exited GRS, is heavily promoting, carries this undertone that Sabah for Sabahans, which means that whatever has been perceived to be taken from Sabah must be returned and must be honoured under the auspices of the Malaysian Agreement of 1963, which carries weight within the federal constitution. So these are things, rights that are enshrined, almost in a sacred fashion. We have a oath stone in Keningau that kind of captures that spirit of agreement of the formation.
Oath stone?
An oath stone.
Oath stone?
A stone with
Sumpah,
batu
sumpah.
Yes. So this is a symbolic manifestation of the agreement that was made. It's in the Constitution. So for Sabah Sabahans is to uphold the sanctity of the Constitution that guarantees Sabah particular rights, which a lot of Sabahans, leaders and the people, feel have been taken away from them over time. There's a merit to this perception as well. There's many times the High Court ruling has proven that the federal government has erred in not paying Sabah the 40% that it is owed. In the wording is 2/5 revenue. Now the issue is...
Oh, that's the 40%?
Yes, that's what 2/5 calculated as 40%. Okay. Now the issue is that with what the Prime Minister himself has said, that apparently this is...
Just 2 days ago,
actually. 2 days ago at Gaya Street, saying that 10 billion has been taken out from Sabah and 17 billion has been given back. This is in reference to what he said last year at KDCA during the Kamantan Festival, said that 16 billion has been given to Sabah, and that is more than 40%. Now the issue with this, and this is what law leaders are going to use as Sabah Sabahans, is that how is the 40% calculated? This 10 billion, 17 billion, 16 billion, where is it derived from? Because there's a lot of muddy grey areas here that we have to talk about, is that revenue, what counts as revenue? In the wording on the Constitution, it says net revenue, but we know tax revenue is a federal jurisdiction, it's a federal function.
Yeah.
So what does it mean by revenue exactly? Revenue sources, that needs to be properly clarified. And until then, people is going to rile up the Sabah for Sabahan sentiment, saying that, see, this is more masking, more obfuscating the promises that are supposed to be given, and it's going to delay the entire processes for restoring Sabah's rights back to Sabah, taken from the federal government. So that's the Sabah angle that's being taken now. It's a sense of being aggrieved, and then that brews into a sense of antagonism, with a lot of Sabahans now saying that, you see, the federal government is taking advantage of us, which is the perception that the federal government shouldn't be developing because we agreed to form Malaysia together.
So do you think that this falls nicely into my second argument on policy, which is greater autonomy on Sabah determining their own fate? And your policy paper that I read that was published under IDS, that was a very intriguing piece of work in my opinion, because you argued that it starts with even the name of the chief executive of the government of Sabah, where you make parallels of Sarawak being premier instead of chief minister of Sabah, because that would equate Sabah to, say, for instance, states like Melaka and Penang, who has the same notion of chief minister, but the Sabah chief minister is inherently a little bit more than what a chief minister of Melaka and Penang has. You also argue that even the name of the state is also needs to be debated, because it is enshrined under Schedule 1 of the Federal Constitution that talks about Sabah and Sarawak, and at that point in time Singapore being a wilayah. So, you know, forget about the details of the policies, even the name and the identity, so to speak, needs to be re-clarified. And you argued that it is well within Sabah jurisdiction to determine for themselves their own nomenclature. So do you feel that that should be the starting point for everything else when it comes to determining more autonomy for Sabah in pursuit of us having a stronger federalism?
Because language matters very much. If we use the same terms and words and nomenclature that's associated with something else, we start to see that there's more similarities than there are actually differences.
Yeah.
Article 1.2 specifically says, and we fought to amend this in the Constitution.
Yeah,
Sabah
and has
Sarawak,
been amended.
Has been amended. It has, Sabah and Sarawak are distinct from the other states in Malaya. And that comes under, if you look back at history, how Malaysia was formed. It wasn't all the states plus one plus one plus one. It was 1 plus 1 plus 1. Singapore you can not consider anymore, which is...
well, it was an amalgamation of four countries,
yes.
And then one exited.
Yeah, so
if you ask a Singaporean, they say they were ejected.
They have their own
their own version of how things happen, but you know,
but whatever it is, Singapore's happy being
they're
where they are.
They're very happy with it.
More power to them. But at the end of the day, it's the Malayan Federation, Sarawak, and Sabah. So Malayan Federation is all these states that we have in Semenanjung. So we need to be very, very specific in making sure that this spirit of the agreement is reflected in identity, reflected in the language that we use. I made the argument saying that we're using a title that is similar to Melaka, similar to Penang, states within Malaya itself, that was under the Malayan Federation. So does that give the connotation that we are the same as Melaka and Penang? For some people that I've talked to who have always talked about Sabah identity, yeah, it kind of makes it sound the same. It flattens out the identity part. When Sabah and Sarawak are very, very distinct, not just culturally speaking, but geographically as well. You can look at other examples of federations like in Russia, Tatarstan. They even have, they used to have the head of state there as called the president. So why not we also start to look at what Sarawak's doing? They call themselves premier because they are different and they have a different set of histories compared to Malaya here. And this doesn't require any move from the parliament side, because this only needs to be amended at the state constitution, which requires 2/3 majority, same as what Sarawak did. So these words and how we play with these words really sets apart Sabah and Sarawak vis-a-vis to Semenanjung, and that sets the tone. It refreshes the narrative, and so when negotiators come back and forth, they say that, okay, we have to engage with the premier, not a chief minister.
Yeah.
It carries off a different kind of set of circumstances, a set of thinking. The mode of thinking sort of slowly shifts.
Even the deputies of the chief executive of the state, they are not considered state excos the way we would in Semenanjung. They are considered ministers. outright ministers, Minister of Sabah for Economy, Minister of Sabah for Tourism and so on, just like how we see in Sarawak. So even then, it's also a big distinction in terms of the deputies or the subsidiaries of the chief executive per se. Now, you say that you need just a two-third majority at the Sabah parliament, but why is it not done if it's just that? Wouldn't Sabah, despite their political differences, rally behind this notion? Because after all, it's for the benefit of Sabah. Why hasn't it been done? Where is the political will, and why is it missing?
Largely because it's not really part of mainstream conversation. We looked to how Sarawak changed to premier, but it did not exactly resonate in the sense that to the political leaders in Sabah saying, hey, why not we start to think along those lines as well? When there were whispers from the ground and from some experts saying that maybe we should start thinking along those lines as well. Because when we see how Sabah was formed, even prior to that, during the North Borneo days in the British Crown Colony, Sabah, compared to Semenanjung, was never a sovereign kingdom. It was never held by a monarch. And in fact,
I don't know, the Sulu family descendants might argue that.
They claim parts, apparently, but we don't know who they are now. But you see that its set of histories really does dictate how we perceive ourselves as a state itself, as a nation state. So we have to also look back towards that. We had a conversation had with a expert of mine, the one I want to name, but he said we could have been a republic. We might as well just be called republic. We never had a king, we never had a sultan, we never had a sovereign monarch. So that can also set ourselves different. So it's in line with what past Prime Minister Muhyiddin Yassin said, claiming that Sabah and Sarawak should be renamed to wilayah. Well, I think a lot of people got the wrong perception. They thought wilayah, they straight away thought wilayah persekutuan, federal territory, but wilayah itself,
a region,
designated region, very different from negeri.
Is it still out of the mainstream conversation?
It still is.
Oh, wow.
And not many people has lobbied to push for these changes, maybe because they feel that it doesn't bring tangible changes. But for me, I believe symbolic changes is just as important because it gives a clear idea of what kind of direction that we want to take, that we can aspire to. Sometimes when we want to have more tangible goals, we need to sometimes aspire to loftier ones as well.
You know, when we talk about composition in language, you got the 4 W's and 1 H. The Y is very much important in terms of how you describe a thing and why you want to do it. But more importantly, the Y is derived from the who. Because the reason why you're doing it falls back to who you are as an identity, as a person. So Sabah right now, I would argue, based on this kind of proposition that you're putting forth today, is in a deeper situational issue because this is an identity crisis. Forget about economic crisis. Everybody goes through that and needs to resolve. But how Sabah identifies yourself is actually quite crucial. More importantly, how we identify Sabah is also quite important. Okay, that's one. Another area of concern is on some revenue-making policies. Some policies that involve revenue-making is all within Sabah powers as well, such as tourism and a few others. Do you feel that that also is not being discussed in terms of how you can actually create autonomy without getting clearance from anybody, from Putrajaya, from your partners in the federation, from the parliament, and so on? You could have just executed this on your own, but it's not done, such as the tourism and communications, for instance. Why do you see these things as a non-starter yet for Sabah for today?
Because a lot of these functions still fall under the federal list. Tourism is still a federal function. To amend that, you need to negotiate and lobby at the national parliament, which requires 2/3. Very difficult to push forward for something like that. So that's why Sarawak is now pushing for tourism to be under the concurrent list. So they're still working on that. However, we are still, I believe Sabah is still not catching on to coming on the bandwagon to articulate it in the parliament as well, which is quite a shame because Sabahan tourism cannot be defined easily along the same lines as the national policy. Because Sabah tourism, for one, is that it caters to tourists directly from China, you have flights directly from China, you have flights directly from Korea, and these tourists have a specific image and expectation of what kind of holidays that they want to have in Sabah, which is they want to experience the nature, they want to experience the sea, they want to experience the mountain, they want to experience the jungle. However, now the issue of that we have in Sabah, which is very much rampant, is the idea of regulation. We have a Sabah Tourism Board that manages tourism mostly in Sabah and the ministry, but these mostly focus on marketing and promotion. We don't have much in terms of regulation and when it comes to monitoring. So with that said, when we move tourism, hopefully, Sarawak will be successful, move to the current list, policy-wise, Sabah should also look to actively creating a Sabah Tourism Authority as well. An authority that's able to monitor, let's say, tour providers, all these licensed operators, to really review exactly, are these in compliance with a policy that is beneficial for the growth of Sabah's more tourism sector. This is able to look forward ahead, to be able to plan ahead even more and to properly define our tourism outlooks, our tourism policies, what kind of tourism that we want to cultivate over here in Sabah. Instead of having to wait for a decision at the national level, right, in the national ministry, it can straight away be addressed because it comes to the idea of local problems require local knowledge. Sometimes a policymaker in Putrajaya, in the tourism field, may see tourism from the lens of, let's say, Kuala Lumpur or Langkawi, but Sabah is a completely different ballgame, completely different environment.
From Malaya Basin to Karambunai to
don't even have to go far.
Sipadan,
the West Coast, East Coast, completely different.
Completely different. Completely different. The inland of Sabah is completely different. I was driving from Keningau to Ranau, of which I saw more than 10 billboards of Jeffrey Kitingan on Sabah. It's crazy. I've never seen anything like that before. It's going to different worlds. I don't know how to say it. You know, from the Crocker Range, driving from KK to Keningau, from taking the inside road to Ranau, and then driving down south again to Tawau, Sandakan, Kunak, Lahad Datu. It's just a world apart. And of course, I'm an avid diver, so when I go to places like Sipadan, it's like, you know, why am I paying a lot of money to go somewhere else when the treasure is right here in Malaysia? You know what I mean? But because of this notion, this whole idea of upgrading Sabah Tourism Board to become some sort of a Sabah Tourism Authority, again, where's the political will? It seems to be missing, even though there's a lot of upside when we talk about STA versus STB, for instance.
Now, this comes down to how we understand federalism in Sabah. We understand federalism under the framework of MA 63. Everything defaults back to the Malaysian Agreement 1963.
And what? 18-point plan?
The 20-point plan, the 20-point agreement, the Intergovernmental Committee report. So this is when Sabahans think of federalism, they think along this framework. Compared to Sarawak, they start to look beyond that framework. They start to look at the idea of federalism in terms of the arrangement of power between a central government and a regional government. A regional government may have different wants and needs compared to what the national government actually sees. So Sarawak has perfectly captured the idea of what does it mean to be with a part of a federation, which is that it's asymmetrical. Not every state is the same. We can look at the examples in the United States, where almost every state across are very much protective over the state rights, and they don't want too much national oversight. We can see it in the United Kingdom. Scotland itself has passed the Scotland Act in 2012, rebranded their executive committee to be the Scottish Parliament. Why don't we think along these lines of experimenting what it means to be Sabahan vis-a-vis here?
And call yourself First Minister or something similar.
Or something like that, right? We have room and ample room to experiment with how we want to define our place in the federation. And for some leaders in Sabah, they have not gotten to that point of developing that thought of federalism. But I believe that once a time, if MA 63 does get fulfilled, maybe they'll start to look at other aspirations of autonomy, or maybe they'll just leave it at that, because this is the issue now. Who would have thought tourism would have been one of Sabah's biggest industries? That wasn't discussed in the 60s by the founding fathers, by the leaders, right?
Yeah, that just naturally took place.
You see that grew, so that means that if we follow strictly just by the framework of MA 63, we're not going to set ourselves up to address future concerns which autonomy might necessitate.
One last area that I want to explore is in terms of what are you looking at personally, Adi? I mean, for people who might not be familiar, he runs an excellent podcast called Kopitiam
Council.
Kopitiam Council, and you talk a bunch of issues there, and of course, more importantly, the research that you're doing also involves not just about Sabah and the federalism and the state and so on, but a few other things. But what are you looking at in 2026, and how does this election affect you personally?
I think the election has given us a lot to talk about, really. With the podcast has been active. My partner Hafizo, he's been coming back to Sabah quite a lot, and we find ourselves interviewing a lot of political people in Sabah, not just that, but political experts as well, people who are also involved in politics, to see, to give us a better idea and clearer picture on what's going on in Sabah. Sometimes you get a different perspective on certain areas, like we were talking to Dr. Bridget Welsh as well, who very well defined the northeast region of Sabah as having a bit of a nostalgia factor for the days of UMNO. That's present there, and I don't know if that's a sentiment that will manifest as support for GRS or UMNO, but regardless, that's something to look forward to. Sabah itself is always an evolving landscape, and it's for sure that 29th November is, even by the last votes being cast, you start to have to see which hotels have what cars, what Ninja Kings or Hilux are going to be, where's the press going to be, right? That can give you an idea of who's talking to who exactly, and who knows how many days that's going to take when it comes to deciding a Sabah state government. Moving forward, I would like to see that leaders, because no one's going to form a simple majority, everyone's going to force to work together. It's going to be government of coalitions, to see how they're able to negotiate with one another, what kind of things that they can come to an agreement with policy-wise, and what kind of approach that they want to take with their relationship with the federal government, with the High Court ruling when the federal government chooses either to or not to appeal. What will the incoming state government's approach to those results going to be? If, let's say, the federal government does not appeal, which I hope they do not appeal, just leave it at that, finally start looking at the 40%, what are the negotiations that are going to take place in creating a mechanism so that 40% is going to be delivered back to Sabah? Because that is an issue that hasn't been brought up when it comes to mechanism, is that...
What about the possibility of it being appealed? The agency is already talking to the executive.
I think with the situation with APCO's exit, Dr. Iwan said that he will resign as a minister, and he has before a decision was even being made. Does that give a sign that he is privy to information on an appeal, which all signals that they're going to? The Prime Minister himself said that I would rather not appeal, but at the end of the day, Prime Minister does have a lot of say in how it works out, because we know that the judiciary is appointed at a very high level by the executive. The judiciary is still not independent in a way that it can make that decision by itself.
Of which this government aims to reform. But that's a different topic altogether. But having said that, again, how do you see this election? Is this the watershed moment of Sabah politics changing for a more matured landscape, or do you think this is just going to create a little bit more noise than previous elections?
I think it's going to be even more decisive than before. Everyone's going to be fighting for their own space. Everyone's trying to fight for their own representation. And if the government of the day that comes in is not able to handle those aspirations and interests of all the competing coalition partners that they're going to have, then we're going to see a lot more splits, a lot more exits, more walkouts. We've seen during the middle of Hajiji's tenure, the Langkah Kinabalu, where UMNO en masse, or half of UMNO left the government to try to challenge their position for chief minister. Will we see more of that happening if whoever comes in is not able to manage their expectations? That is something that we have to look to in the next 4 to 5 years. This is what at least the Chief Minister Dr. Sri Hajiji has been able to do. He's been able to manage everyone's expectations, being able to manage the coalition quite relatively well, but at the same time balancing his relationship with the federal government. So we'll see how does that kind of attitude, will it completely change as an attitude, or will we see more of the similar kind of negotiating, very cordial attitude in the future.
Do you think that the Putrajaya element is going to play strong to some of the partners in Sabah? I.e., do you feel that Anwar's impact and influence and the national parties like PKR and DAP making some form of inroads there?
Given the situation with what happened at Kota Kinabalu Gaya Street the other day, with the Prime Minister talking to somebody on the 40%, I think that has done quite a bit of damage to PKR's reputation in Sabah. Already the Sabah for Sabahan sentiment is very strong. The want for local parties is very much there. And there's always been a rejection of Malaya-based national parties. So to double down on this kind of, I would say, to some people seeing as patronizing tone that the Prime Minister has demonstrated, would just push PKR in a more dangerous situation, and by extension does jeopardize their partners such as DAP, and by extension GRS, who has decided to work together with Pakatan Harapan. So this could also affect the perception of the people, saying that, well, GRS is in cahoots working together with PH, right, who already says these things. Why aren't they saying anything to challenge that kind of sentiment, right, that kind of rhetoric? APCO has already shown that they're not taking a sitting down. And they were the coordinators for Pakatan Harapan Sabah. For them to be able to walk out like that before even a decision was made showcases the fragility of working together with Pakatan Harapan, and shows that maybe aligning yourself with Pakatan Harapan, with the unity government, may do more damage than does give benefits.
Okay, we'll see how the election is going to pan out, and of course you can watch all the elements and of course updates on the Sabah elections on Astro AWANI. Sabah Memilih is our predominant show covering the elections. There's going to be a lot more of content like this in the weeks to come until 29th of November, and even so, you know, Adi, you're not the first person, not the last person to say that negotiations might further take place even after the polling day to determine who has the willpower and the political will and mandate to actually govern Sabah. So there's a lot of developments here. Until then, thanks very much for watching. Catch you in the next one.